Hi, my name's Don McLaughlin and my wife Cheryl back there. We're going to tag team the first presentation on La Sagrada Familia, which is this structure in the middle. Okay? That was magic. The Church of the Holy Family. It's the largest Catholic church in the world being built right now. It started in 1880s and still is not complete. It's one of the most visited churches in the world. They have like 5 million people come to this church every year, and through donations they raise about $100 million a year. Father Tom would be very envious of that number. He's ready to do that, I think. Yeah. So it's also considered one of the 10 most beautiful churches. I mean, that's a very relative term, whether a church is beautiful or not, but it's ranked up in that thing, in that area. So this is actually a picture of it. We'll show models later that show there's a big Christ tower in the middle that is missing yet. It still has to be built and hopefully be done by 2026, they think. So, go ahead. The beginning of the church was back in the 1880s. Father Joseph Bacabella was a devout Catholic, had a devotion towards Saint Joseph. He had a vision for this, and he's one of 2 people that's buried at the Sagrada Familia in the crypt. Another priest, well known at the time, Father Jose Rodriguez, proposed, let's build a church in honor of the Sacred Family. So they meshed together with another priest on the next one. Father Vives, it says in Google how to pronounce that. And they got together, and he actually had some funding and went out and bought some land far outside the city of Barcelona, a couple miles outside the city. They thought that was a crazy place to build a church. That's where he got the land cheap. And speaking of cheap, the architect, Francis de Villar, he's proffered to do his plans for the church for free. So the price was right. So he said, okay, let's do it. The next picture shows, this was his view of what the church should be. It's a regular New Revival Gothic, much like Notre Dame Cathedral, and it's a little bit like St. Peter's, but not outstanding anything special. It was just another church that looked like this in Europe. The next slide shows construction began in 1887. This is actually the crypt, which is like below ground, where you'll see a concert where we did this concert from this crypt. And a big brouhaha came up over this. Villar wanted to do all stonework, but the people with the money said, well, we need to do reinforced masonry, and it's just facade it was stone. Well, who do you think won? The money won out. So Villar said, well, I'm out. I don't want to be the architect anymore. So he left, but no one else wanted to follow him up. No one else wanted to be the architect that finished Villar's work. They wanted their own cathedral to do. But one of the architects, I have an apprentice who's 28 who might be able to start this, but I don't know how good he'll be at finishing it. So the next slide, and that's where Antonio Gaudi got his start. 28 years old, he becomes the architect of one of the major projects in Spain. He really lived the project. He lived at the project site for 20 years on site. He made a studio there. He had students, interns working with him to create this vision for 20 years on site, not doing any other work, but was on this site. As you can see, the 2 visions that they had, the blue shows Villar's vision of what the size of the church should be, in blue with the outstanding buttresses. Well, Gaudi had the larger vision of all that's in red. The large church was also 85 meters tall. Gaudi's church was 170 meters tall. To give you a perspective of that, 170 meters is a little bit shorter than the tallest building in Kansas City. So there was some changes going on there. He also changed the crypt that we were in. He made 2 staircases, and he made light come to the outside, which is unusual for a light to go into a crypt inside a church. So those are some major changes he came up with. Yeah, next slide. This is a model. Remember, this is like the 1890s. There wasn't a lot there wasn't a computer-aided drafting, so it was all done usually with models. You can see the center spire is called the Christ Tower. The Christ Tower in perspective will just barely fit under the St. Louis Arch. Give you an idea of size. Next slide. He had a vision of using nature, because things are in nature where the strongest go. So you can see on the right was a tree with the limbs going up and supporting the roof. And this is the inside of his cathedral with the limbs supporting the roof, not having a lateral load, so he didn't need the buttresses of the other Gothic styles. Next. There's a vision looking upwards inside. It looks like you're inside a forest and you're looking up into the forest. Another thing he did was he used a lot of natural light. So there's a lot of openings in the roof that did two things. It brought in light, but also lowered the weight of the roof so that he didn't need the exterior buttresses.
That's the altar, isn't it?
The altar
Yeah,
down way
right.
down.
That's
below.
what you're looking at, is the altar.
This might be Father Tom, I don't know.
Yeah. There's Tim. You're in it.
Another unusual thing he did, this is the model turned upside down. He hung the model to try to find static determinacy of the structure, so that if there was a problem with it, it wouldn't fall apart. You could just move those things around. You could measure the tension in the wires just by plinking them, like you do a guitar string. The more weight and tension in the string, the higher the sound. So then he knew about what loads were in some of the structures. So not to bore you too much with that, but we'll go on to. So this is some of the pictures during the construction. You see it's all done with scaffolding, but Gaudi knew when we got into this that he wouldn't be alive for this project. So he needed to get something done that would get tourists there. So he created the Nativity facade. The church has 3 facades. This is the Nativity facade on this side. Those towers are about 100 meters tall. Remember, the center tower is 170 meters tall, giving you perspective on where they were in 1926. So in 1926, Gaudi passed away. He was killed by a trolley accident. He was going to go to Vespers in the evening and got hit by a trolley and passed away. This is a picture from 1930. About 25% complete. It fell into disarray in World War I. There was a Spanish war, the place was vandalized and all the models were destroyed. Everything he'd done up to that point. And the whole site was pretty inactive until the late 1950s when it got re-energized, reintroduced, and we got computer-aided design and things like that to start to complete the project. And this is what is now done. In 2010, they reached the 50% complete on the project, but between 2010 and 2026, they're going to finish the last 50% to show you how quickly the new construction techniques have come into play. And they have tower cranes, high-strength materials, and so also in 2010, Pope Benedict consecrated the temple.
John, you said he was out in the country when he started, right?
Yeah, you
Not
can see it.
anymore. Not anymore.
He knew that the city was going to come out to him. And Barcelona was really helped by the Olympics. When they had the Olympics there, it really put them on the map as far as transportation and things like that. So that's kind of the boring structural background. Cheryl's going to go over some of the religious viewpoints and images.
All right, so today I'm going to be talking about the religious symbolism of La Sagrada Familia. Antoni Gaudi was a devout Catholic. And in this time, we've got to remember that most of the people were illiterate and could not read. And he wanted to have this church so that it would teach many of the people about their faith. Okay. The term the Sagrada Familia actually means Temple of the Holy Family. Okay, so all throughout the church, you're going to see all kinds of information about the Catholic faith. Okay. I gotta make sure my notes align with his. Okay. This is the Nativity facade. That is the one that Gaudi did supervise. This talks about Jesus' life from his infancy to being a young man. And this is the Annunciation of the angel visiting Mary at the top. And this is the Star of Bethlehem. So this whole facade is so tall that none of us could get a picture of it all in one piece. So we are doing little snippets of it so that you can actually see the details there. Okay? Next. James, can you have the next one? Thank you. Okay. All right, the Nativity kind of celebrates the life of Jesus. At the top of the very facade, there's a triangular shape, and this is the marriage of Mary and Joseph. Okay. Here, the nativity scene is presented. Can you see down here? Here's Joseph and Mary and the little baby. And you'll notice up here we've got tons of angels here. They're all children in this particular scene. And the one that really gets my attention is this little boy who's trying to slide his way down from heaven to take part in the nativity scene there. I thought that was really entertaining. So most of these sculptures that you see are in action in some way. It's almost like you just took a picture of them in our story right here. So it's really fun to see all their emotions and reactions. Several of the statues are playing musical instruments, and so it didn't seem to matter what church we went in. We saw harps and violins and bassoons, of all things. Those were represented in every church I saw. So for being constructed of stone, they're very, very detailed, very gentle, very beautiful sculptures. Okay? All right. In this one, you see the shepherds out in the field, and then of course up here you're seeing more angels. But notice all the little details here. This church is called the Catalonian Modernism style, so almost like every inch is decorated with something. The Nativity facade is directly supervised by Gaudi, and it faces the east as a sign of first light. Okay. Father Tom had a wonderful homily just a few weeks ago about Jesus as a carpenter carving the ox. Help me, what's that? Yoke. Yes. And so here's what Father Tom was referring to, so you actually get to see what he was talking about. Okay? The facade here took 36 years to build. It contains the visit of the wise men, the flight to Egypt, the slaughter of the innocents, finding Jesus in the temple, and then Jesus as a woodworker. There's 3 doorways that are part of this facade, and they represent hope, charity, and faith. Okay? When I first saw this facade, my first reaction was like, oh, this is heavy. So this is the facade called the Passion facade, and Gaudi wanted this to be harsh and sharp and not much decoration. And he wanted it to look like bones, like skeletons. When you see this, you think of death. He wanted it to be heavy and harsh and angular. So the white skeleton has letters on top of it. And what it says is, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. This particular statue was very, I think, telling and very well done in a harsh style, because if you can imagine Judas betraying Jesus, that their embrace when when Judas kissed him would have been very harsh and very rigid and stoic for that being betrayed. This is an interesting inclusion in this scene. It's called a magic square. They were very popular back in the 1800s. And if you'll notice, if we add up the sums here, so what's 15 plus 10?
25.
Plus 7?
32.
Plus 1?
33.
Oh, okay, let's try this. What's 1 plus 14?
15.
Plus 14?
20.
Plus 4?
33.
What are you noticing? Okay, whether you go horizontally, vertically, or diagonally, they all add up to 33. How is that symbolic of Jesus? Right, okay, that's how old he was when he was crucified. So, okay, interesting. There's all kinds of symbols like that. This one really spoke to my heart as soon as I saw this. Who do you think that might be?
St. Peter.
Peter, yes, it is Peter, okay? And he had betrayed Jesus. And of course, all of us know about times that we have turned away from the Lord too. And so this one really, I had a lot of empathy for it. I thought this was an interesting symbolism up here. What do you see on his head? What shape is that?
Cross is upside down.
Yes, it's an upside down cross. Good eye there. And that, of course, represents how Peter was crucified. He didn't want to be crucified in the same manner as our Lord. So that was included in because you see how Gaudi is teaching in every one of these sculptures. Okay. Here we can see the weight of that's on Pilate's shoulders as he labors over his decision about what to do with Jesus. Okay. In this one, Veronica is illustrated right here, and she's holding the veil that had Jesus' imprinted face on it. And you'll notice that she herself has no face. And the reason they did that was that they did not in any way want to distract her face, to distract people from Jesus. So that's why they carved her with no face at all. Okay. This soldier right here is said to be named Longinus, and he was the soldier that supposedly thrust the spear into Jesus' side. Okay, he later converted, according to legend, and became one of the early Christians. Okay, and up here you can see the soldiers that are throwing dice for Jesus' tunic. This is the crucifixion scene. The actual cross is one that suspends itself over the people. So as you walk inside that entrance and you look up, Jesus is on the cross looking down right at you. So very powerful. Okay. Oh, one other thing, if we could go back just that slide. Right here, if you notice this pillar, and I didn't notice this until I saw the picture, this is the scourging pillar with Jesus. Okay. The glory facade is not finished yet. It's the last thing to be done in the next 3 years. This will be completed. And so it's going to show Jesus in heaven with God. It's going to have these 8 columns that you see right here. And that will allow there to be 7 doorways, which represents the 7 sacraments and also the 7 petitions that are included in the Our Father. The window ornaments and finials will reflect the Eucharist. It illustrates the message and teachings of Jesus. There are going to be 3 clouds above the columns that will represent the Trinity, and there's 16 lanterns. There'll be 7 that represent the 7 days of creation and the 9 legions of angels. There are 18 towers on La Sagrada Familia. 12 are for the apostles, and they actually have those named as you go around the sides of the church. There's one to honor Mary, There's 4 for the evangelist, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The tallest tower is complete now. It is the Christ Tower. We got to see that there. Gaudi ensured that no man-made object would overtake the natural world. So this church is just shy of the tallest mountain in Spain. Gaudi uses every inch of his church to teach, okay? So up on these little finials, I guess you could say, there is grapes and limes and corn and wheat and bread, all of them symbolizing the fruits of the Holy Spirit, and the grapes and the bread represent the body and blood of Christ. All right, let's take a look inside, okay? Gaudi wanted the interior to be like an immense forest. Each of the 84 columns is unique, so each one is totally different from the other. They represent the 84 species of trees that they have in Spain. Down the center nave, he uses palm trees as a symbol of glory and sacrifice. And in the shorter nave, he uses those laurel trees, and they are symbols of victory. The columns are different colors because they use different stone depending on how much weight was on that column, and they needed different weights and structures and strength of stone for different places in the church. Okay. Several medallions provide artificial light inside the church, and he has symbols of the 4 evangelists, so you'll see up here. Throughout the church, besides that, they have patron saints of all the dioceses in Spain. So. Note how these columns pick up colors from the windows at different times of the day and the year. So they aren't really blue columns. That comes from the light that's coming in from the stained glass windows. And then you see the columns of the designs up here are the leaves of the trees. So this is, taking a close look at the ceiling. So contains lots of skylights, so it has lots of natural light. Okay. This is the main altar. So here's the altar right here. And then Jesus is suspended on the crucifix. Excuse me. So behind the altar, you'll find the organ. And there are 1,500 pipes in this organ, but that's not enough. You can't hear this organ throughout the immensity of this entire church, if you can imagine that. So they plan to install 2 more organs in the next 2 to 3 years so that they will have music that will go all throughout the church. All right, so this is some stained glass that was designed by a person called Vila Grau, and there's 16 different types of glass that they use, and they have different kinds of textures in these glass strips to reflect the light. Some people do see images. Well, ready for the next slide. Some people do see images in the abstract work of these windows. Like for instance, I kind of see a face in this section right here. Maybe you see some different things, but they're not designed to be any specific thing, and that was very unusual for a church to have windows that didn't represent something. You'll see that there are names in some of them, but they weren't totally designed with anything in mind. Okay. You can take a look at some of the colors. So we were lucky enough to be in the in the basilica during the summer solstice. If you will go back to, let's see, can you go back, James, or not? Okay, all right, let's go forward. Okay, here's what I was going to show you. This is what the light coming through those windows looks like in the winter solstice. Can you imagine that? So the light comes perpendicular into the windows and colors the walls and the ceilings like that. It's gorgeous, isn't it? So I wanted to show you that on the east side, you see these colors that emanate, and this is the summer solstice, and that's what we got to see. So it's greens and blues and yellows, okay? And then on the west side, we have the reds and oranges and golds and yellows and greens that appear. So you can kind of see the contrast between the different sides, okay? The east side reflects the birth of Christ, the poverty and light. And the west side represents water, light, and resurrection. And not only does it color all the interior, especially the columns, but it also colors the people. And you can also kind of consider that being bathed in Christ's lights. Okay? All right, so here's a rose window. There was a big debate over what kind of glass that they were going to use. And they at first were thinking about overlaying stained glass on top of each other. There would be 4 layers. And Gaudi experimented with that, but he didn't like the look of it. So he went back to having leaded glass, and that allowed them to actually put words into some of the windows. Okay. All right, so here is our choir in concert in the crypt, where masses are said throughout the day. Gaudi is buried in this location. Okay. We have a picture of James, who is playing the organ down there during a mass that we had. And that organ down there produces an extremely beautiful, sweet sound, don't you think, James?
Yes,
Can you
nice.
James? It really showcased James's talent there. That was awesome. Okay. Now, St. George can be found everywhere in Spain. If you've heard of St. George's legend, how he killed the dragon, he's the patron saint of Catalonia, where this is built. In England, Ukraine, Ethiopia, and Georgia, and even Moscow, they all claim St. George as their patron saint.